So, welcome back to the Renewables Podcast. Before we get into the conversation today, we just want to touch on some products from our sponsors at Proteus. And I'm going to start, Sam, with this SPD that they've got. Now, with these, you can mount them straight onto the buzz bar. You don't need to have an overcurrent protected device for them, which is super handy when we're limited for space. And we're trying to combine a smaller renewables board maybe with some EPS circuits. There's a lot of uses for these. They're absolutely fantastic. We've been using them for a good few months now, not that long out on the market. So yeah, absolutely fantastic that Proteus are looking after us as installers. And you've got another range of products over there.
I have, yeah. I've got the coloured Henley blocks, or 100 amp link blocks, as some people call them. And gone are the days. I'm a bad contractor for using the black ones for so long, the Bakelite ones, because you try and knock one of these top knockouts out and it basically shatters the full thing. And I'm guilty enough to say that I didn't know these existed. So we started using these now, and they're absolutely fantastic. Solid. You've got the little blanks in here as well. So if you don't use one of the terminals, you can blank it off or just slide it out when you do need to use it. They're fantastic, and obviously they're all coloured as well, so that you know exactly the phase colour and the colour of the cable or the phase that's going into it. So yeah,
even the
fantastic
functional earth, or the Cranis collection as it is called, in pink. And they work with the 3mm Allen keys, which is consistent through the range of the mains tails isolators as well. So they've got us at heart, I think, as installers. You're not messing around with different screws and heads. Another fantastic range of equipment to tie in with the bi-directional RCBOs, which is obviously the leading product Proteus have got at the minute.
Yeah.
And they've had that for a long time, which is really helping us again as renewables installers. And that's one of the reasons that we're so happy to be working with Proteus on this show. But without any further ado, let's get back to the chat.
It is, and it's very, very tricky. And so in terms, Luke, of people that are entering this industry, or even people that have been in the industry for a long time, is there anything that you see that is kind of sort of the common mistakes or the easy wins that people could look at? Does it go back to simplistic things of just being a tradesperson in a building, things like fire stops, or are we looking more at, do you see things more on a technical level that people could be integrating that would help that fire safety, or that they maybe should be doing anyway? What are the kind of the main things that you see, if you've got any points on that?
In terms of what, installation of PV?
Yeah, sort of common mistakes that people are maybe making that would help them comply with the fire kind of safeties of buildings.
I think not the best read, but I think obviously being aware of approved document B and what's within it basically will give you a bit of a rounding understanding about the compliance of fire safety. It does cover a lot of information to do with internal linings and external envelope of building, etc. Not all of it is applicable, but I think having a bit of a rounded knowledge of what is within it will be able to guide you. Again, I think being aware of the fire safety legislation, the regulatory reform, especially if you're working operating commercial buildings, because that is what sort of regulates it. In domestic, it's not applicable unless you're working on flats in communal areas and you're doing sort of a landlord distribution, a PV system for a landlord, like communal lighting and things like that sort of thing. But being aware of the legislation, and again, a lot of this issue I see within fire safety of PV is around sort of poor workmanship and poor selection or erection of equipment. So it's just, following manufacturer's instructions as a minimum. And obviously, terminating cables correctly and, using the correct MC4s, not mismatching. Just basic things really, but I don't think, in my professional opinion, they're embedded enough within the training curriculum, really. And I think that's where we need to address this as a main issue.
A lot of it falls back into the training space. We spoke about this before, didn't we? When you say training, are you talking about the kind of bolt-on courses we do, like the BPEC solar and battery storage, so maybe it covers elements of fire safety more than it does, or are you looking at kind of apprenticeship level?
I think a bit of both. I think, as an apprenticeship level of any trade and curriculum, I think there needs to have a level of understanding around fire safety and building construction and what you're doing or how you're doing it may impact a particular building. I think that general guidance, maybe even as a unit, would be worthwhile. But I think obviously with specific, you could say maybe high risk activities such as renewables, you could have a bit more specific in-depth knowledge of why we ferrule our DC cable, etc. The multi-fine strands, you should be doing that. Use the correct torque ratings in accordance with manufacturer's instructions, etc. Just reiterating them key points to people, because from my personal experience, the training I received wasn't great, and I only started learning when I was on site. But at that point, I could have caused a fire maybe myself, because I wasn't aware of what I was really ultimately doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lack of knowledge can cause anyone to make mistakes. We've all been on that. You don't come into the industry knowing everything, do you? And it's that acquired knowledge. And I wonder if some of the training that we're offering as industry at the minute just isn't good enough. We're having a lot of this where you've got books that are read at your exam practice papers, and there's less emphasis on actual things we want to learn. Again, I'm speaking personally in courses I've been on, going back years to regulations, 2391 and all those kind of things. They're great ways to learn, but a lot of it is heavily focused on passing at the end rather than accruing knowledge. I think the training sector does need to look at that a little bit and try and improve what they're delivering through the PV and battery storage courses, because there is still a huge adoption phase of people coming into that. So we can reach a lot of those people, whatever the training's been in the past.
I think there's almost like a fear on these training courses you go on. There's a fear of you failing it, whereas actually it should be that, yeah, you failed it unfortunately this time, but you can have another go. Like once you had a bit more training, like these courses shouldn't be hard, shouldn't be easy to attain. Otherwise, there's no point. Like if you've just learned 50 answers to 50 questions, when you go out into the field, you're not going to have like a textbook situation. You're going to be under time limits. You're going to be under cost limits. You might be designing a job with, unforeseen things happening. You've got to have that base level understanding of fire safety or PV installation or general electrical wiring or plumbing and heating. It doesn't really matter. If you just taught to pass an exam, you don't have the basic knowledge there to actually attack a problem out in the wild. So I think there is all the courses that I've been on recently, like when I redid my solar and all this other stuff, they were just, it felt like they were terrified of you failing it. Whereas actually, if you failed it, you might actually take it more seriously when you actually go there to learn it again, and go over things. It was quite stark that they were just like, well, these are the answers to the questions. Make sure you tick the right box. We've given you 2 hours to do it. They were really just like crossing the fingers that you passed every single time, whereas it should be, here's the exam. If you fail it, it's fine. We just obviously need to do a bit more training on the areas that you failed in, because we know we rely on our training that we know we've taught you the basics of this. We haven't just taught you to pass the exam.
I think just to add to that, having done a little stint in education, I think unfortunately, training is obviously driven heavily by money, and it's a high value industry. But again, it's stats driven. And obviously, if it, you throw the book and say, no, unfortunately, you haven't made it this time, then that affects maybe that tutor's stats and what they're doing, or the organization as a whole. So I think that plays quite a big input in it. And that's why there's very sort of handheld through the sort of testing process of these particular exams. But I don't agree with it. I think, it's sending people out into the wild and, potentially causing, dangerous occurrences to happen, and it could be avoided ultimately.
I think we've got a really good mechanism of industry that works really well, and that's the endpoint assessment AM2. So I think you could deliver courses like renewables, but have an endpoint assessment for it that's maybe outside that centre. I know it's more time off work to go and do that, but maybe we need that. That's something that could happen. I know they extended the AM2 recently. I think it's 3.5 days now to include elements of renewables. I've not taken it, so I may be speaking out of turn there, but I think that's the case. And in terms of the shorter courses, like the 2391, the way I viewed that, you're kind of demonstrating your known knowledge already. So with that course, you're not going to be taught, you're going to show an assessor, what you can do, that you can test and do your exam and all the rest of it. But with the solar courses, that maybe 3-5 days, you're going to accrue knowledge, not demonstrate what you already know. They're teaching you, and there's not enough of that. It is very much, well, we'll read the BPEC book, for want of a better example, at you, and we'll go through a few things on the board, and then we'll do some practice exam papers. And that's not what we want as electricians. I'm happy to pay for training that's valuable and will test me to demonstrate those skills. And if that's applied to everyone in the industry we work, I think the standard would naturally rise. So maybe some sort of endpoint assessment. It doesn't have to be a full 3.5 days AM2 repeat, but maybe half a day or a day where you go somewhere like the Siege and Training Centre that they've just put in place and show what you've learned and what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's we do need to move away from this fear of failure on some of this. I mean, like you mentioned, I know it's all to do with money, and it's how everything seems to be set up, and it's going to be a very hard kind of ship to turn in a different direction, because if one changes how they do it, then they maybe get less people attending their course because all the rest of them seem easier to pass. So it's not easy, but I do think we need to have better maybe tracking of these courses to actually see how many people are failing it, because from like school days, not everybody passed every exam. So maybe it needs to be that you start looking at how many people fail it, and if nobody's failing it ever, it's a case of, well, why are they not failing it? Because this is a tough course.
Yeah.
I'm sat there, having done solar for 14 years. On my I think it's every 5 years you got to redo it. I'm sat there thinking, I do not remember that calculation. Like, where has that come from? So there's elements there, but if you're just taught how to pass it, come out of it, and your knowledge has not really improved, other than if you got asked that question exactly as it was posed to you in the exam, you might be able to answer it. But you want to have that knowledge to go, right, this is a real world situation. I can't use a bit of software. I need to get back to the pen and paper and actually do this, because it might be the difference between using 6mm or 10mm PV cable, for example, and you could save a hell of a lot of money if you can verify that 6mm is going to work over that 10mm. So it might be the difference between you winning and losing a job as well. So yeah, there's something to be said for the trading there. But I just wanted to bring us back a little bit to the fire safety part of it, in terms of in-roof and on-roof, because in terms of my understanding of the fire safety part for in-roof and on-roof is that in-roof you are effectively replacing the roof covering. So you've got that roof covering needs to be the same fire level as the tiles or the slate or whatever it is that was covering that roof, really, for the fire safety of that building. But for on-roof, Mark touched on it a little bit, but for on-roof, we've got that tiled slated surface underneath the panels there, haven't we? So I'm assuming we kind of rely on that when we're doing an on-roof system more so than if we're doing an in-roof system.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely. That obviously the existing roofing structure itself should be obviously fire rated at that point anyway. Only a concern that I bring into this is more recently is obviously that flashings ain't part of the MCS sort of build up either. So you've got obviously different flashing materials that may be used when installing solar PV, which what their fire classification is often unknown, and what impact do they have against the original roof covering. So that's something that I'm sort of exploring a little bit more around, and I think roof flashings may eventually become part of the MCS product directory, maybe, because and in approved document B, you are allowed roof lights, etc., which are plastic, and they're allowed to meet a certain sort of plastic fire rating, let's say. But obviously, as a weak point, potentially, plastic coverings which may be used around roof hooks, etc., could impinge and affect that roof covering. But that's a bit of a that's me being a bit forward really in terms of that as does it have if you've got 30 roof hooks and you've got 30 penetrations with potentially what are the fire rating on them. So it's just food for thought really that I'm sort of toying with within the industry and sort of getting consensus really to say, well, hang on, with we know this is a B roof T4, it survives 60 minutes of fire penetration, but that one slate next to it is now a plastic flashing. So yeah, that can do it, but what's the rating of that?
Yeah, I never even thought of that.
There's a few bits there, isn't there? There's like the tiles that we can put in that stop tiles cracking. So I forget the name of them now, but the rubber tiles that you're putting under your tiles on certain roof construction. Also your cable penetrations as well from some of those where you'll cut a hole out of the tile and fit that on top. Is that a potential propagation route? If you were making that hole internal to the building, you'd want to be fire stopping, wouldn't you? Is that something that we need to get intermittent versions of those maybe? It's an interesting one, Luke, and it's one of those where we do need somebody exploring those things because it's beyond the wheelhouse of us as installers to determine if that is suitable or not. It needs cleverer, for want of a better term, consultants and manufacturers and building designers to decide, if that is a problem and something we need to be stopping on.
You are that man.
Yeah.
No, but I think we've spoken about this before, Mark, as well, about electricians. We seem to dip in and out of many different areas of the trade, and I think it needs someone with the focus on a little part of that industry. So why I was so keen to get you on, and Mark was as well, was that we wanted to get this very small in the grand scheme of like designing and installing a solar PV system. It maybe should be a bigger part, but something that is usually, what are the requirements that they've asked for as fire protection? Oh, they want us to be 1.5 meters from there, that's fine. And then that's kind of it. There's obviously like the B4 or BT4 rating and stuff. But other than that, you kind of like, I'm focused a bit more on space for these panels or where the inverter's going and a lot of that. And I think there's a reason why the flashings of an on-roof system have never passed our minds as to if that's a fire risk, because ultimately we haven't even thought about that. Needs someone like yourself and others in that little niche of the industry to actually interrogate these things and go, well, those flashings now should be infilled with an intrumescent piece. They need to be metal construction or something similar. Like you see back, I don't want to insult anyone, but olden days, a lot of flashings were lead, and that's going to have a lot better fire properties than a piece of plastic. So should things go back to that? No one wants to go back from innovation, but is there a way that it can be tweaked to maybe make it a little bit better in terms of the fire safety element, and probably not really add much cost, if any cost, to the actual product? So yeah, that's.
Is there any kind of committee that's looking at these things with you, Luke? Is it like a group that looks at fire safety?
Yeah, I'm on the MCS working group now for mounting and PV as a whole. So these sort of things are being discussed internally, and obviously in light of the recent stance MCS have put out about the building integrated stuff, that is obviously due to be addressed. Obviously, that particular issue is outside of the remit of MCS. It's more of a governmental issue, but ultimately, as installers, they are your go-to, so they need to have the answers for you guys, which I completely appreciate. But yeah, I think there's a few people within the industry who, like myself, who are working on various areas of it. Nothing specific around it, but I think between all the different sort of people I'm working with and around, we're sort of collating it to the right people like MCS, etc., and hopefully going to sort of conclude on these sort of grey, muddy areas that we need to get clarity on as installers, really, because I think it's gone on for quite a long time, really, where this hasn't really been addressed, certain issues of this sector, and it needs the clarity. You guys need the answers so you guys can focus on what you do, knowing you have confidence in the products or materials and the workmanship that you need to provide for your clients, really. Because I understand it is a minor part of the work that you guys do as a whole, but it's a very crucial fire safety part that it depending on the occupants and whatever, it does have a big impact. So there's a few people in the space. It's not a lot, to be honest, because it's such a grey area, really, as such. But like the conversation I meant about the flashings, there's sort of areas that I'm sort of seeing and going, right, let's try and get some answers on that and see what the outcome is, and working with different manufacturers to sort of get to them answers, really, rather than it being sort of pushed down the line and it be a reactive thing, like, oh, okay, the fire spread because of X, Y, Z, and ultimately at that point there could have been a fatality. So we want to avoid that and try and get the answers before and give you guys the answers so you're equipped and can do your job to the best of your abilities.
100%. I think I was mainly asked the question if there's anyone watching who wanted to kind of offer input from the manufacturer, wholesale or installer base, if there's somewhere to point them, but it sounds like it's just at you directly.
I've told you, Mark, he's that man.
Maybe the MCS working groups, because there may be some people out there who are like, actually, yeah, this is something I'm really interested in and I want to offer a view, be that manufacturer or whatever. So it's really reach out to yourself.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few good people that I'm working with, but more than happy and open to sort of work together and collaborate on this, because it does need further, research and addressing these issues. So, you guys can do what you do best.
I suppose one of the main things is actually speaking to the manufacturers of this equipment, see what testing is in place, if that needs to be tightened up, or if it needs to be more regular, or what can stop potentially some of these products coming out before they've been tested. Like, I'm pretty sure for the best part, if there are these combinations of equipment that people are installing that haven't got that official stamp, they're most probably going to be fine, but they haven't got that stamp. And that is the stamp that you rely on if there is a problem to go, don't look at me, Your Honour. This is what we fitted, and we fitted it to this. So the reality is it's probably going to be okay, but you need that. You need to cover your backside with it a little bit, don't you? With a certificate or an approval, because ultimately the buck stops with you as the designer and the installer. If you've been told as an installer to fit that stuff and someone else is taking on the design part of it, then that's more on them, as long as you fit it to those instructions. But if you are taking on the design and the installation part, which I think, to be honest, most of the time a lot of people are, but maybe not really considering that is a big part of responsibility that's shifted to you as the designer, then you need to be making sure everything is crossed and ticked, because otherwise, if it's that 1 in a million job that happens, or maybe lower odds than that, that causes an issue, and suddenly they're asking you a lot of questions that you've maybe never even considered, and none of us want to be in that position. No. But one thing I wanted to ask Luke was, so there's obviously the regulations, there's the guidance out there, but for in your experience of this sort of equipment, is there anything that you would say, look, I'd be personally, if I was the one with the pages in front of me and I was writing these regulations, is there anything that you would want to bring in tomorrow? Would you say rapid shutdown? Would you say ban this type of product? I'm not asking for names for any product, we don't want to be sued, but is there anything that you would kind of bring in if you had the keys to those regulations?
Very good question. I think,
and not one I prepared you for.
No, not at all. I think mainly around. I've got a bit of a gripe around the testing process around integrated and external roof coverings. I think they're two different products, two different entities, and they shouldn't be classified as the same. Right. I think around testing of that specifically, and obviously, because that for me is where the risk lies from ignition. Historically, if you take a roof without PV, what ignition risks do we have there? Unless you maybe got fairy lights or whatever around your guttering potentially, maybe. But with PV, with the voltages that they're at, if you standard string inverter design, that is where the ignition source would be, and that was where it would propagate. So I think ultimately is that process around integrated and that testing procedure, I believe, isn't fit for purpose more so than anything.
So you got the testing of the products to make sure that people are only buying products that have been tested for the application, or more specifically tested for the application that they could be used for, rather than just being tested as a panel. It's been tested as an on-roof and potentially an in-roof panel if it could be used.
Yes, correct. And I think testing it only takes products so far as well, because I think if you look at like Grenfell as an example, that product was certified under a certain way of using it, but it was missold the way it was installed. So it was tested in a cassette form where all the ends were sort of caved in and done, but the cheaper way of doing it was another way, but it wasn't certified under that. So you can almost get like misinterpretation and misselling of a product by saying it's been certified. Yeah, if you did delve deeper into the sort of how it's been certified, and then you look at the Warrington Fire and Kiwa Fire certification, it will state how it's been done. And if you deviate from that setup that they've done and it's been tested for B-Roof T4, it's not warranted B-Roof T4 no more, because you've completely deviated from it. Yeah. From that one screw not being used as an installation, example. So testing is a very grey area because we need it, but any deviation from it in a minor form to a major form, it's basically not worth the paper it's written on, because you've deviated from it at that point.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because often, even when we're doing our due diligence with this equipment, there might be a new product that comes out and you're kind of looking into it and going, right, we could use it here, we can use it there, operating temperatures, all that sort of risk, that good stuff. But if you don't do that and you just see it as its performance headline figures, you're kind of just seeing it, oh, it's a new product, I'll start fitting that. But have you looked deeper into the spec as to what it's actually designed for? And again, it opens up another minefield as installers, because you kind of go, well, I see my mate on social media fitting it there, but I've just had a look and it's not compliant. And then you chat to them, or you chat to the wholesaler or whatever, and go, oh yeah, it's fine. This person told me that you could use it on that, or this person told them, and suddenly it's like this massive web of people that actually haven't gone back to the basics and had a look. And I've fallen victim to it before, where you've taken it on someone's word that you can fit it there. Hopefully, I've never been on the other side of that where I've recommended something, but you do face that a little bit because, like MCS said, and it's always stuck with me. We're all time poor. We're busy trying to run businesses, have personal lives, and all this sort of stuff. That it is very tricky to get that guidance and spend that time. But ultimately, that's what we're signing for when we complete those certificates. So so there's that side of it. Is there any sort of technology that you would put in or anything like that you would say kind of like, this just seems to be the way that we should be going?
Yeah, I think rapid shutdown has its place. I think I think America's been utilising that for quite a long time now. But I think what we got to remember with America is that their tactics in terms of firefighting on buildings particularly is they ventilate from roofs, and they cut holes in the roof structure to ventilate fires. So their rapid shutdown stuff was mainly around about keeping firefighters safe due to their tactics of when they're operating to put a fire out. It does have its place in the UK. I think it's hard to say really, because I think every technology will have its pros and cons, and there'll be somewhere in the middle where there's not a one type solution, I think, for every application and every building and every structure. So I think you've got to take each particular case on its own merits really, and apply the right technologies and safety mitigation measures depending on the application really. But rapid shutdown does have its place, I think, ultimately. And there's obviously technologies out there with optimizers, etc., that are built in. I think, without dominating markets, because obviously there's two major players within the US because of the mandate of rapid shutdown. It's created two different manufacturers who completely just dominate the market. So you want to be careful of that as well, because obviously, there is other innovation in other technologies. But even as silly as it sounds, but you look at like arc fault protection on inverters. A lot of the time, it's not even turned on. You've got to manually turn it on, for example. And it's like silly things like that, like being aware of that and putting that on manually. That can pick up a fault earlier on than it becoming an issue, really.
Yeah, and you raised a great point, Mark, earlier about a lot of these rapid shutdown devices. It's not built into the panels. You are increasing the number of connections that you're making on the back of a system that we fit a lot. You're putting one of these optimizers on the back of every single panel, and you've got an extra like 2 connections on every single panel, because you've got the connection from the panel to the optimizer, and then the optimizer then link on every single one. So are you increasing a risk there of something going wrong? It might not even be something that would cause a fire, but it might be an increased cost potentially for that customer ongoing if that connector fails, or has that been mismatched? You're increasing that, so there's no kind of silver bullet. One thing I quite like is the fire alarm integration.
Yeah.
So because let's face it, most of the time a fire in a building is probably going to be caused by a dodgy thing from Amazon, or a dodgy appliance, or an old appliance, or some cigarette, or we haven't moved away from having these standard fires, that actually having something that shuts that solar PV and battery storage system down potentially, I think is a really easy win for what is quite a small, maybe £500 to add that, £500 to £1,000 to add that, and you don't need it till you need it, and then when you do have it, it can be the difference between the fire brigade maybe coming into the property potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a simple thing to put in place, but again, in the realms of cost, and everything is so cost driven in the solar sector. If it's not regulated and mandated, not enough people will price it in, and you'll just be seen as too expensive. So I do think a lot of this boils down to the regulatory control of the industry. And you mentioned Grenfell, and it's such a shining example of things going so catastrophically wrong. Very rare, but something horrible happened. And a lot of the fallout from that has been around CPD and increasing the skills of operatives doing stuff. But fundamentally, it sits in the way things were tested and regulated. And we're still seeing that now across industry. There's the big push for us all to go and do CPD and record what you've been doing and everything. But why can't the regulators come up with approved processes that we can all follow that are properly researched and thought out, sat more in safety that everybody is having to apply, rather than all this best guessing and everything sat in price rather than overall value. It seems such a sad state of affairs, I think, in all parts of construction.
And it kicks the can down the road. Like, if you've deviated from my specification, then that's your problem, not my problem. And it's just then, it's just a constant battle against these things. And I think that's half of the issue, is that no one ultimately wants to take the liability and of it happening until it actually happens. Then it's like, oh crap, okay, who can we point fingers to now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've been really generous with your time. I just wanted to touch on batteries for a minute, because obviously batteries are a kind of this new piece of the puzzle. We focus quite a lot on solar PV there, but there's obviously people now considering batteries in houses without solar PV. They maybe don't, maybe a flat, or the roof is so old that they don't want to replace that yet, so they want to get a battery in first. We've done a couple like that, and obviously the PAS document came out as like what I felt like was kind of, they put it out like, just put that on the table and see what happens. And like we mentioned before, not every part of it we all agree on, and we might all agree on different parts and disagree on different parts. But how do you see kind of batteries coming into residential and commercial properties? What do you see as kind of the main risks of us going down this road? And is there anything that you want us to kind of look at quite urgently in terms of, does the PAS document identify a lot of the things that you're concerned about, I suppose?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, from my opinion on the PAS, I think it's a very proactive approach, very ahead of its time, let's say, which I'm glad to see. I think a lot of different manufacturers are quite frustrated because it doesn't take into consideration different chemistries, etc. But I think ultimately the fundamental points of it for me is that whether the battery is the primary cause of fire or secondary cause from an external ignition, all chemistries can end up today, at present, into thermal runaway. So, and that is a devastating effect that has, jet-like flames, etc., which is, very difficult to deal with even from the fire services perspective. So I think, it is ahead of its time. It's not everyone's sort of first choice, but I think it's a good sort of stab and start in the sector and in the industry. But I think it does need a bit of revision here and there. But ultimately, it does change the goalposts a little bit. I'm quite surprised about the amount of backlash that has been had from it, really, especially because it comes from a meaningful place and it has good grounding, I believe. Yes, it does make certain installations a bit more challenging and maybe a bit more work because you're not fitting them in lofts now, for example. But if you look at their manufacturer's data sheets and the operating range on temperatures, they're probably not compliant anyway. So, come on, as an installer, you should be doing your technical due diligence and checking that anyway. But I think it's come from a good place. I think it needs some revision, but ultimately, it has made things a little bit harder and tighter. But really, it's only for the safety of the occupants of the building and potentially maybe the fire and rescue service as well, who may need to attend, whether it's involved as the primary source or it could become involved from it's a general electrical fire within the property.
Yeah, I think what we've spoken about before, either privately or on the podcast, it sort of all merges together with our conversations. But we kind of saw the PAS as kind of this first stepping stone in improving the safety of these installations. And you mentioned obviously about, maybe not being as easy now that you can't fit them in lofts. Some of these batteries are getting so heavy now and so big that it kind of makes it easier than being outlawed in lofts in this document, because you're kind of going, there's a reason now where you can go, we're not putting it up there. It's not because we, don't want to get it through the loft arch. It's because we've now been told by this document that we can't do it if we want to follow this document. And as well, I feel like the industry can be a little bit contradictory. We're always wanting them to go, well, give us some guidance on it. As soon as we're given guidance, we go, you can't give us guidance on that. It's a really tricky one, and that's what surprised me a lot with the backlash, because again, we lose jobs because of the smoke alarms and the price that increases. The increased price that adds to the job. But ultimately, it's become one of our red lines, really, because now it's been pointed out. I can't ignore it, and it's one of them. I can't go on this one. I won't bother, because I guarantee you that's the one that has a problem. So yeah, that's it seems like quite a contradictory way that the market has kind of reacted to that PAS document.
I mean, you can't sit here and say I want more regulation and definition of what we need to be doing and then fall out with someone who's putting their hand in the air saying this is what we think as a committee, what should be done. You know, there's stuff in there that I think everyone would disagree with and want tweaking a little bit, and that's natural. But ultimately, that someone's come forward with that, I fully support. Despite that, I think that's important. You know, I'm sure yourself, Luke, if somebody came forward and said, this is what I want to do in terms of fire safety, but there's a few things in there you disagree with, you get behind it and try and grow and develop it rather than trying to throw your toys out the pram and dish it off.
The thing is, it was up for public consultation. That's sort of the worst part about it. I remember this being out for public consultation, and there's a lot of people who said, oh, I never had my voice heard, or I didn't know. And it's like, well, you know, you're quite big players within the space, and this is quite, you know, this will affect you drastically potentially. So I don't really see that as an excuse, to be honest. But hey,
I think there needs to be more shouted about. It needs to be more well publicised about these draft for public comments, because it does depend on who you follow on LinkedIn or this, you know. And if you're not a big social media person, it's like, how do we get the word out about these draft for public comments better? If you're in that space, it can seem quite obvious that these things are out there to be discussed and for you to put your 2 pence in about it. But if you're not in that area, you can go through a lot of your career not even having ever known that you can input into this sort of stuff. So maybe there's a bit more of a push there to go, look, have your voices heard, put it in suppliers or, you know, electrical wholesales where you know every electrician is at some point going to go. You know, is there a way that it can be put out there and shouted about a little bit more? I do think that needs to be done, but ultimately, it's have people got the time to even read through it? It's such a tricky one. But then, if you haven't, don't moan about what it says. If you haven't actually contributed, unless you have contributed and they've gone against it, you can try and fight your corner there. But
it's one of the easier ones to read, to be honest. It's one of the shorter little bits of content we've got in terms of regulations and standards that has document. It's pretty clear, cutting and concise as well. And, you know, maybe that's the way industry will go. We'll have more of these PAS documents alongside the standard regulations, and they'll just be referenced in them. Like we've got Amendment 4 to BS 7671 going through now, and they're going to reference that, or that's the proposed approach, going to reference that as something that needs to be adopted to comply with BS 7671. So maybe if that can't be updated and changed quickly enough, stuff like that, PAS can be developed. We mentioned about IETO 1 or whatever it is, but I think all that needs to be centralised in one kind of space. So,
yeah, I agree. I think referencing other documents, whilst it's frustrating when you're trying to get the answer and you go to BS 7671 and it goes, oh, make sure you read this document. You think, oh, God, why can't you just tell me? But it allows for a bit more flexibility when you then go to that other document and go, okay, so this is a bit more specific to where am I putting batteries, how far away from windows or vents does it need to be, and you know that sort of more specific stuff. That the book, if BS 7671 had everything in it, it'd be this big, and then no one would ever read it. So it is a
it could never be paint by numbers. That's not
No.
what that book's for.
No.
It's like to base your decision making from, a benchmark, if you like. But yeah, I think we'll see more of that. We'll see more of these passages. Maybe one around fire safety on roofs.
Yeah.
potentially, yeah. I think a question for you both then: have you come across in sort of installers that you're a competition you've gone up against, and obviously you followed suit with following the PAS, and you've got others saying no, I'm just going to put it in the attic, and then your clients are then questioning you, going, well, why are you saying outside and it's going to cost me X amount more, for example?
I had one, this one we're doing right now. There was a customer who'd had one proposed for going in an attic, and it was only from speaking with them and making them aware that that's not currently best practice. Got to be careful in how you term this stuff, because it's not, I think any of it's really legal. It's like guidance, but they went away and did the research themselves and ultimately came back to us as a result of that, despite the cost difference, because ultimately lost confidence in that installer who wasn't aware of it. But that isn't going to happen in maybe 9 out of 10 cases, sadly.
Yeah, I'm gutted you beat us on that job.
No, it was Dan, actually.
Yeah, we get it all the time, because we've started doing the videos. I think you do as well, Matt, to try and explain on our proposal about why we've included stuff within our proposal, and try and give that, because there's so much to it that you can't just write about it anymore. You have to try and give that explanation. It's so much easier to talk someone through stuff. And we've started really heavily focusing on that because, to be honest, I don't want to be fitting loads of smoke alarms in a property. I want them to already be there when I'm doing a survey. I think some customers think that we're trying to monopolize on this and go, right, well, we're going to get more money out of this. I would love for that house to be already compliant, for us to be able to go in there, price to the solar, the battery, in the specified locations, and everything else be hunky-dory. But if it isn't there, then for me, that customer is hiring me and my company to do a professional job. That is to do with the installation, make sure it's installed correctly, make sure it's commissioned correctly, but also it's making sure that you have, as a professional person and a professional company, taken in all of the guidance that's out there as well. Because the customer, certainly domestically, isn't doing that. And if you're not doing that as their professional person, then who is? Like, they are coming to you for a compliant system that takes into account all of this professional guidance out there. You might agree with some of it and disagree with some of it, but you've got to be able to stand on that hill when something goes wrong and go, well, we've followed this guidance here. It's not statutory or best practice or whatever. It's just an article that came out, and we've took the stance that we're going to install our equipment like this, or we're going to add this piece of equipment in because we believe that makes it a safer install or a better performing system. You need to be able to back yourself up with that, and that's why for us the smoke alarm thing came in and isn't going anywhere. Because for me, when I thought about it, I'm like, why have I not already been doing this? And if someone was to challenge me on it, I always think about it if I was stood up in court and someone said, right, Mr. Featherstone, why did you not fit smoke alarms? Because ultimately, that property, it's nothing to do with your solar PV, but you were the last tradesperson in there. That fridge freezer's caught fire and it's injured or whatever the situation is, that family, you were the last person in there. We can see that it's best practice now to fit smoke alarms. I don't want to be stood in that dock saying, oh, it was all cost, Your Honour. It was all about cost. And that's a really easy thing to say when you're able to win jobs through that. But I would just love the baseline to be lifted to that, so that I didn't have to fight people for smoke alarms. Us fitting smoke alarms that's maybe added £1,000 to the job because it's a brand new system. I'd love the stuff to be there. I don't want to be ripping the house apart trying to get a 3-core between alarms, or trying to find a permanent live feed because all the lights are wired in the switch. I don't want to be doing that. I want to be doing the renewables part of the job. But that customer is employing us and a lot of you listening to do a professional job, and part of that professional job is making sure you are aware of the guidance. You might choose to not follow it, but if you choose to not follow it, you need to be able to stand up for that and go, we're not following it because I don't agree with it because of this reason. Like you said, it's all best practice. It's all there to help you.
And just to add to that, Sam, I think if you, if the homeowner spoke to their home insurer, for example, and said, oh, I've got a quote for this and a quote for that, one's compliant to all the current legislation and guidance and one's not, they'd be like, well, surely we wouldn't insure you, that may be an afterthought, once it's installed. And yes, you've gone for the cheaper quote, but, if they can wiggle their way out of a potential loss claim because you haven't followed guidance, even though it's guidance, they would probably still throw the book at you and say, well, that's your fault, your issue.
Yeah, we're looking at it from a criminal point of view, but there's the kind of contract law and loss that someone might suffer if their insurers have refused to pay out and maybe didn't make them aware of having smoke detectors put into their home. And there's angles there around EV batteries and the solar side of things. We always have that conversation with our customers. Check with your insurers to make sure that they're happy with continuing your policy with the PV, battery, EV, whatever it is, and making them aware. But it seems like often we're the only ones having that conversation with them. And again, maybe that's an education piece that MCS needs to do, focused at consumers. I think there's a big space for that at the minute. We're obviously all in the industry. We're interested in this. We wouldn't be talking and listening to podcasts like this if we weren't. But the people who need to hear a lot of this content aren't interested. They're consumers who are looking at price. And it's how do you reach them? If you can't regulate a lot of this in, how do you reach their ears and get them to take that in?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of insurance policies probably have something written in there about smoke detection anyway, just as general home insurance, I would have thought. So you might actually already be non-compliant before you even have the stuff. So I don't want to go down like a massive rabbit hole of like, right, well, how many places have EICRs and all that, which is another thing. Yeah. But, us fitting that, it's not like we're going, you need to spend an extra 10 grand on this because we think that after this best practice guidance, this is the best way to go. We're saying you need to spend maybe £500 to £1,000, depending on the scale of the system. We've had to do them where they've not got any smoke alarms. Some of them had a smoke alarm, the cage is open, and I can see the battery leads. It's one of the with just the battery missing. And you go, well, you should have this now. Like, look at everything plugged in. Your kids have got all this stuff. You should have this plugged in. But this is like a massive like triggering thing for me. I get on my soapbox about this a little bit. But yeah, I think that's I need to rest my voice on that.
It's been a great chat, and we've taken up loads of your time already, Luke. You've got a good distance to travel. Is there anything else you wanted to mention while you are here with us?
I think really just for your listeners and all that, just to be mindful of fire safety and what impact you're having within an existing or new building. Because ultimately what you do or what you may do may impinge the overall performance of that building. So just be mindful of that. And, there's guidance out there, approved document B I quoted earlier. Yes, it's general to, whole building fire safety, but there's going to be elements that will be relevant. So yeah, pick out what is relevant and just, upskill, CPD, note your hours and bear it in, consider it when you're doing your work, really.
I think it's not about knowing the answers either. We're in a world now where you can get access to people like yourself that know this sort of stuff pretty inside out. Or if you don't know it, you probably know someone else in the industry that knows it. It's never been a better time to kind of get all this information from many different people with LinkedIn, with social media, with just other organisations that connect you with other people. So we're not saying, I hope we're not saying, because I don't think I'll be able to comply with it, but we're not saying that you need to know absolutely everything about this industry. We're just saying you need to ask the questions and actually consider it so that you can, if you don't know something, it comes up on your checklist of what you're asking the consultant, the customer, like with the insurance thing that you mentioned. We're wanting people to ask the questions because that ultimately will unlock that conversation, which actually might be an education piece for you, the consultant, the customer, or whoever, and actually start that conversation so that it's not just something that's not even thought about or considered.
Yeah, due diligence, isn't it? I think. Anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, that's me done. That's me.
It's been a really good one. I've properly enjoyed it, and I will drop a link to Luke's LinkedIn profile for anyone who does want to get in touch with him about what's going on more widely around these topics. If there's anything else you want to add to the discussion we've had, drop them in the comments below. We love the engagement around all that. Tag the content on social media and share it around as well. We're trying to grow this podcast out there in the social media of things. Huge thanks to you again, Luke, for coming in to speak with us. Thanks again, Sam. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.